Yes, estrogen is making you depressed. I mean, there's actually clinical literature on this, but we're going to go through a lot of anecdotals that show us conclusively men below 60 with depressive symptomology have higher levels of estradiol. And what's tricky about this is guys on testosterone that are making extra levels of estradiol in this new culty kind of like, direction not to manage estrogen on TRT.
15 or 22 or something to 35 or whatever it is. It doesn't even matter. It's absurd. I already talked about this before. There is no standard mean range for men utilizing therapeutic testosterone. We need as much estradiol, and i.e. estrogen, to confer protection to our heart, to our bone mineral, to our brain.
Estrogen is fickle. Too low and you have depressive symptoms too, but too high and you are definitely going to be depressed. Not only depressed, but dare I say anhedonic. Not interested in life, not interested in like going and killing it, not interested in making money, not interested in your goals, not interested in your body. There's a whole host of things that estradiol, once past a certain range, can basically debilitate you on. All right, so we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about some of the scientific literature. I'm going to bring you through some anecdotals, and I'm going to give you a warning about estrogen. Who are we? We are Cortex Labs, and we're predominantly a male performance company that specializes in 2 globally shipped nootropic stacks. The first of them is the Cortex stack, which you can find at livecortex.com or down the description below. The second is the Torque stack. I mean, these are killer stacks for brain performance and energy. Been on the market for many years. You can get them down the description of this video. I am a high-level consultant on TRT, nootropic regimen formulation, erectile dysfunction. Host of other things, you can book me under a minute at livecortex.com. Okay, so just as a experiment, right? Something for you to go and try. If you go to the testosterone subreddit, which is reddit.com/r/testosterone, in the search bar you type E2 depressed, you are going to find a lot of alarming posts. And you're going to find this one. That post. The old dick breaking. And I just want to run through a couple of these. But before we do, I just want to say that generally speaking, when estradiol gets past a certain range, and especially post an AI when it's creeping up, or if you increase your dose and the estradiol is creeping up past where you're used to, or perhaps you're on TRT and it's like, things were great for the first 4 weeks or 6 weeks. And then when the serum estradiol got past a certain range, you started to kind of feel fucking wacky. Past that range, which is going to be somewhat different for different men, but generally speaking above 40 picograms per milliliter, you're going to start having depressive symptoms, and in some cases anhedonia. Okay, so you want to manage the estradiol despite what Danny Bossa and Jay Campbell and all these hardly scientific people are telling you. You're on TRT, you're going to be making more estrogen than usual, and it is not good for you. I'll take us to a thread by Just a Name 27 that goes, originally planned to post on steroids, but it's inaccessible for me. This guy's on a cycle, 500 milligrams testosterone, did regular blood work, and E2 is 2 times over the upper limit. So upper limit's about 30 picograms per milliliter for most males. I mean, it depends on I think LabCourse is up to 42 or something. So, I mean, just couch that as 90 to 100 picograms per milliliter estradiol. He goes, I've been pretty much having all the high E2 symptoms, a little bit of bloat, little acne, BP spikes, blood pressure spikes, except gyno, but the worst is the depression, anxiety, and fatigue. Basically, I've never seen a post here or on our steroids claiming that high E2 causes anhedonia, maybe mood swings, but my mood is constant and super low. Could this be the culprit? I mean, the answer to that question, like, let's just look at, Call Lives Matter's response. This is a guy that's like, kind of popular on the TRT or the testosterone subreddit. It's like, I've seen him there. He's got some good stuff to say typically. He goes, you have high E2 on paper and you're having symptoms in real life. Take your AI. I mean, for guys on TRT, that's usually the solution to that. Just get the AI in. Don't overdo it. Just like, take your 0.125, get it compounded in an anastrozole tablet, and see how you fare. I've done a video on how to dial in an anastrozole, and you should watch that if you really need to understand how to do that, because it's a tricky drug to take. But I mean, the real answer is yes, the culprit is estradiol in this case. You're going to have depression. You're going to have anhedonia. You're going to feel like shit. You're going to have extra anxiety. Estradiol functions as a stress hormone past a certain range. Let's look at, just a survey of men and what they say about high estradiol on the testosterone subreddit, which is a great place to get information about people's anecdotals, in a thread titled, Hey guys with high E2, how do you feel while it's high? First response goes, I have varying degrees of high E2. When I overshot test too much, I had the following: bloating, emotional. When my E2 was just a bit too high, I had the following: obsessive thoughts of pointlessness in life to the point of concern. Like, does that sound healthy to anybody?
You don't have high estrogen symptoms. There's no such thing. You do have high visceral body fat stores, high belly fat stores, and likely and resultingly high inflammation.
I'm an idiot. Depression. Like bullet point, depression. Fatigue. Now, interestingly, and this is another point I'll make at the end of the video, but I want to quickly highlight now, he goes, when things are dialed in just right or even a bit below range, and he's referring to estrogen, I have a general feeling of well-being. Me too, and for most guys, that's going to be the case too. Too high, depression, anxiety, anhedonia. Too low, depression, more anxiety, anhedonia the same, and then you've got libido issues. You actually have libido and dick problems on both ends of the spectrum, actually. Here's one. If you need it more convincing, high E2 warning. Sides can get very bad, and an AI won't instantly cure it, and this is true. Aromatase inhibitors work pretty quickly, but if it's really past range, and just the serum doesn't tell you a whole lot about how much estradiol is binding at the ERB and ERA receptors in tissues, and like the ensuing effect that estradiol has on neurotransmitters, specifically serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. It effectively raises them and sensitizes the receptors, but too much is too much. This guy goes, so a few weeks ago, I told the story of how after trying sub-Q injections, it spun me into a hellish ride of what I eventually found to be attributed to extremely high E2, and he was 60 to 80 picograms per milliliter. That's high. You don't want to be anywhere above 40, in my opinion, for most guys. He goes, it starts with intense bouts of anxiety for the first 2 weeks, and following the 3 weeks, anxiety subsided with the application of an AI. Extreme lightheadedness and vertigo, as well as some other minor symptoms. Like, does that sound fun to you guys? Listening to fucking Jay Campbell and Danny Boss and all these idiots, frankly?
You don't have high estrogen symptoms. There's no such thing.
Like, okay, the traditional endocrinology and traditional, TRT sort of, even if it's internet, effectively bro science, there is credence to it, my friends. You don't want the estradiol going too high. He basically goes on to say he stabilized E2 and then very slowly eventually got better. But then he goes, some of these sides were severe. I have read about guys developing massive depression or having suicidal thoughts because of E2 problems. Now, here's a real unfortunate situation that is kind of driven by, this is why cultish, like ideological driven internet groups are a really fucking bad thing. And you've got to be careful not to fall into their ideology and their way of thinking, especially if it's not science-based, which most of it isn't, because you got a guy here whose doc won't prescribe him an aromatase inhibitor. Like, dude. Title goes, depression, fatigue, bloating. E2, question mark. He goes, I am one of many who have a terrible doctor who has no business prescribing testosterone in the first place. Yes, there are some of those, and yes, that's unfortunate. He goes, I began taking testosterone 6 months ago in the form of androgel due to being on methadone. For about 2 months, I felt amazing. See, this is key. Brought back the life I was so long gone. I managed to taper completely off methadone from a very high dose within a few months. Plus, hey, testament to how effective TRT is for managing neurotransmitters and kind of getting you back to feeling like a man again and feeling fucking great. Then he goes, started having trouble in September when I switched from androgel 1.62 to 1. Then I switched to injectables, 150 milligrams of testosterone cypionate. He goes, anyways, for the last 2 months, I have been tired, very anxious, very depressed, bloated as hell, and having hot flashes. He then says my doc refuses to prescribe me an AI. Classic case. This is what I see all the time. Let me just break this down. Guys go on step 1. Guys go on TRT. Step 2. They read all this nonsense from these like wannabe YouTube gurus that aren't into the scientific literature, that run with like these pseudoscientific ideas, about, estradiol is cardioprotective and all this stuff. And they just jump to these conclusions. It's like this non-scientific assumptive conclusion jumping. It's not healthy, friends. And then so they don't get on an AI, or their doc won't prescribe them an AI. And then, 2-3 months into TRT, they're having a fucking terrible time. Yes, that's because the estrogen went way out of range. It's fussing with neurotransmitters. It's sensitizing receptor sites. Who knows? You could have excess levels of norepinephrine. I mean, that will happen. You could have excess levels of serotonin. Then you're making more prolactin. That's going to depress you. You got to be careful. Estrogen directly affects neurotransmitters and their receptor sites. Not that I suggest going to the Ray Peat forum, because it's sort of hit or miss. You get, straight scientific stuff that's actually validated and great points being made. And then you have, again, unscientific, pseudoscientific nonsense, which I guess, you can find pretty much everywhere. But, here's a great thread titled, Estrogen is a stress hormone. It can both trigger and potentiate the effects of stress, where the OP actually cites some really interesting literature. There's some papers here too. When the literature goes, new research from Yale University may help explain why women women are twice as likely as men to suffer from stress-related mental illnesses such as depression. Animal studies show that high levels of the female sex hormone estrogen affect the brain's ability to deal with stress. Estrogen was found to amplify the stress response in areas of the brain most closely identified with depression and other stress-related mental illnesses. Look, if it wasn't clear, and if I haven't been clear, you let the estrogen get past a certain range for whatever you're doing. TRT, maybe you're on HCG, maybe you're on Clobin, maybe you're doing some sort of natural thing to, bring testosterone up. But, specifically, obviously, for guys on androgens, you're pushing, if you buy into this kind of cultish internet ideology around don't manage estradiol, you're pushing territory where you could be running into mental illness. Like, it's serious stuff. You do not want that hormone going out of range. Hormones are it's like you want to optimize them and you want to get them in the right place, but you've got to be careful. You have to respect them. Hormones are like tequila, just enough and you fucking feel great, right? The right amount and you feel great. Too much and you don't respect it, wheels fall off the bus. Lastly, I'm going to take you to a paper called Increased Estrogen Level Can Be Associated with Depression in Males, where, they basically conclude, after extracting data from 3,925 men from this study called the Life Adult Study, that men under the age of 60 with depressive symptomology had higher estradiol levels compared to those without depressive symptomology. And that depressive symptomology was associated with increased estradiol levels in younger men, regardless of their BMI. Okay, so what is the bottom line of bottom lines here? All right. Number one, if you're a guy that's on TRT, please manage the estradiol. I understand that, drugs like anastrozole and other aromatase inhibitors are difficult to dose. In some cases, if you need to lower your dose and you still get adequate response from androgens in order to balance out the E2 to between 20 and 30 picograms per milliliter, and you can feel good and everything functions, great, do that. If not, because that's not the case for every guy, and a lot of guys have to use an AI depending on what they need androgen-wise, please, learn how to dose anastrozole, exemestane. These drugs can be successfully used with minimal side effects, minimal negatives on your health, and really giving you a much better time on TRT. You really should go read threads like this, AI saved my life and TRT experience, where a guy basically goes on to say that he listened to this kind of excessively vocal, unscientific minority that is parroting effectively nonsense from people that are in the pro-estradiol groups. So it didn't take an AI for the longest time and was on TRT and had a terrible time. Finally started getting the AI in and managing the estradiol, not crashing it, not saying that, managing it to an adequate level, getting it within the sweet spot range, and his whole experience on TRT changed. Again, I did a video on how to properly dose anastrozole, which you can find on our channel. It was done somewhat recently. You can also hire me to help you get on a protocol of aromatase inhibition and or otherwise protocol adjustment to get estradiol in that sweet spot range. Number two, major point, it's if you had just recently looked at estrogen and it was sitting at 43 and you felt okay, and then suddenly for a week or so, you began having depressive symptoms, anxiety, and you kind of just feeling like it was all due in your head and simple things were due in your head. And, it's at that point, if you have evidence that you were 43 creeping up in serum estradiol, I really even, it's I don't even really see a need to go run serum estradiol, run a test, take an AI, get yourself 0.125 milligram compounded tablets, get the estrogen down 10 points, 15 points, and I can guarantee you that that's going to go away. Because number three, you do not want to let the estradiol get too high and then keep it there, okay? Because as one of the threads were saying, there is a lag period, right? There's effects on neurotransmitters and receptor sites, in this whole estrogen-mediated stress response in different regions of the brain that you may not be able to alleviate instantly or within 2 or 3 days or something. Okay. So you don't want to put yourself in the place because you're listening to these guys on the internet, or you're just letting the estrogen go, where then you're, potentially stuck with depressive symptoms or anxiety, or God forbid, suicidal ideation for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. You don't want that. All right. So let this be a warning that yes, this isn't an opinion. This isn't me just I'm on the low estradiol camp. I'm not on any fucking camp. I'm on the scientific camp. I know what balances males, state, their kind of brain state, their mood state in terms of serum estradiol while on TRT and when not on TRT. And the bottom line is, you want it between 25 and 35. That's a safe bet no matter what, for most guys. I hope I've reached some people. If you're one of those guys with estrogen a little past the range and you've let it go, but you're dealing with depression, yeah, take heed. I'm not trying to bullshit you here. I'm actually a little jaded that this misinformation has been pervasive around the web, and a lot of people are suffering because I get clients that call me that are like that, and we've got to fix them up. As discussed previously in the video, we've got consultations for this. I mean, we've got full-on TRT protocol optimization consultations, among many others. And for the month of October, which I think we only have like 9 days left or 7 days left, all consultations are discounted. So if you want to get a call with me, an email consultation with me, a larger program, even all this stuff is discounted right now, livecortex.com. But importantly, if you're like just kind of spinning your wheels on dialing in your testosterone protocol, yeah, I understand that it's hard. It takes a specialist to understand how to do it, or at least a specialized way of thinking. You have to know the right things. I've been doing this for many years. I'm on TRT myself. If you need help dialing your protocol in, please hire me. Please, sure, we'd love your business, but for your sake, get on board and let's square it away. It has been a pleasure hanging out with you guys. Much more content coming this week, so look forward to it. I hope you guys had a great weekend. Let's go have a killer week, and I'll talk to you in the next one.